We've been talking about, we started this whole series, if you will, of people deconstructing their faith and actually abandoning their faith because of not understanding something from God's Word or refusing to believe something of God's Word. And we started going into Habakkuk because he was dealing with the same thing, and maybe there's some lessons we can get from these verses that will help us, especially when we don't understand. I think that's one of the hardest things on our faith is when we just don't understand. How do we get through it? How do we move forward? How do we move forward when we don't understand what's happening to us, whether it's a trial we're going through, grief that we're dealing with, some financial troubles, health troubles, whatever it is. When we don't understand, when all of these things are piled on and we just don't have a clear view of what God's plan is, and then as Habakkuk is finding out here, when we see what God is doing and then we still don't understand why He's doing it that way, are we going to abandon our faith, or are we going to do what He tells us to do here, and that's to live by faith? And I want us to go on into chapter 2, because chapter 2 actually gives the second part of God's answer, and it's actually, I believe, His final word on the matter when it comes to this particular thing, when it comes to Habakkuk, and still trying to understand. In the second part here, he's going to tell us what it is. Well, let's just go back to verses 2 through 4. This is where we ended last week. And it kind of gives us an idea of where God is going with this when he addressed Habakkuk. Notice he said, "Then the Lord answered me," excuse me, "write the vision and make it plain on the tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith." And you remember he told Habakkuk, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, but you're not going to believe it and you're not going to understand it. And then he goes in and explains this a little more. Of the reason people don't want to accept it is we're either proud and live for ourselves and we're self-sufficient, or we live by faith. And we're going to have to choose which one. We're going to have to choose, are we going to live by faith, or are we going to be proud and self-sufficient and think we can just fix things ourselves, that God, I don't need God in this, that I'll just do this myself. I don't understand all this other, I'll just try to fix it. He said, you're going to do either way. And he said, part of this is just waiting. We may just have to wait and to see what God is doing. And don't try to be proud and this self-indulgence of it's all about me and I'm going to do it. And that's what he's going to get in and talk about tonight. He's going to talk about how the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, as they come in, this is the type of people that they are. And he's basically saying, don't be like that, because this is what's going to happen. When you try to take God, or you try to take God out of the equation and you start living for yourself, this is the way that you're going to be. So when you don't understand something, don't abandon God. Don't abandon your faith and run from it and start doing as you please, because all that does is just make more trouble and bring more heartache, and ultimately it brings damnation in the end. And that's what I think he's trying to explain here. So as he goes through and gives the characteristics of what this nation that he's bringing on Judah is, and these are his characteristics, he's actually saying also that don't be like this, because this is what's going to happen when you're proud and self-sufficient, when his soul is not upright, as he says here. So he's going to show the contrast of this is how you're going to live if you're not living by faith. If you're not trusting in His answer, if you're not trusting in Him even when you don't understand. And that's the hard part. I think the real hard part is don't try to take things in your own hands, because it's not going to work out. It never works out. So let's read these verses and we'll go back and look over them. Starting in verse 6, he says, I guess we'll start in verse 5. I don't know why I've got verse 6 here. It says, "Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell. And he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heats up for himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a proverb against him and taunting riddle against him and say, woe to him who increases what is not his? How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges, will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become like booty, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and of all who dwell in it. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, and that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sins against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and all who dwell in it. What profit is the image that its maker should carve? The molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it. To make mute idols? Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. So as we go through this, it seems kind of odd what God is saying here, but he's talking about the nature of this nation that's going to be coming upon Judah. But it's a warning to them of this is what living by faith doesn't look like. Don't be like this, because this is what's going to happen. This is what the end is going to be. This is how you're going to act. This is what it's going to be like around you. So as we go through this, I want you to just think about that image as he does this. Let's look back at verse 5. He says, indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death, cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations and heats up for himself all peoples. He said, here is the problem, and then you're going to start seeing the symptoms of that problem. He said, an upright, self-righteous, someone who trusts in their self and not God, someone that's not living by faith, this is what they are. The problem is greed. The problem is it's never enough. The problem is they live from themselves and they want to get all they can. They just think if I can just have this is what's going to make me happy. And he says, here's what it's like. It's like a drunkard that drinks. They're never going to get enough to be satisfied. Or it's like someone who goes out. He says, just like death. Death's never going to be satisfied. Death's not going to stop and say, that's all that I need. The graves are full. I'm not going to take any more. No, death's not satisfied. He said that's what this person is like. It's like someone who is never satisfied. And think about it. Is that not right? When we're trusting in ourselves and we're not trusting in God, because when we don't understand what God's doing, what do? We resort back to ourselves. And when we start trying to do things, it's never enough, is it? If I can just do this will fix all of my problems. Does it? If I can just have this is going to fix everything. Does it? It's never enough. We think it is, and that's the problem. When we start indulging ourselves to think we can decide what makes us happy, we can decide what fixes our problems, and we stop trusting in God, He said, this is what's going to happen. This is why people abandon their faith. They're searching for something out there. They're never going to find it. It's never going to be enough. He says, just like this nation that's coming, they're going to pillage and pillage and pillage and take and take and take, and it's never going to be enough to satisfy them. And at the end, as we're going to find out, what happens in the first place? Will it just be a nation that people go by and visit the ruins one day? Because there's nothing left. They don't survive. They don't last. They don't find what they're looking for. He said that's what the end of it's going to be. So see, this is what happens when people abandon their faith. They look for other places other than God. They're trying to be satisfied. I told a lady this not too long ago. I said, you're looking for something you're never going to find. You're trying to find this peace, this satisfaction, but you're trying to find it in all of these things that you gather, all of these things that you have. You're never going to find it. It's not there. It's not in things. It's not in what you can take. Now, what he's going to describe here is not just the accumulation of things, it's how they take them. It's all about taking and taking advantage, because that's what happens when we start trusting in ourselves. We start taking advantage of those that's around us. We don't think of anybody else. We don't think about how our actions affect somebody else. How do our actions affect our spouse? How do our actions affect our children? How do our actions affect our congregation? How does our actions affect the influence that we have about Christ? And it goes on and on. We don't think about that. All we think about is what we can obtain and how we can attain it at any means, because we think that's what's going to fix it. We're not happy with what God says. We don't understand it. We can't grasp it. We don't want to accept it. So what do? We start trusting in ourselves. And notice, and we don't have time to get in depth in all of these, but notice some of these symptoms. It starts out with greed, then it's taking what's not theirs. Look at verses 6 through 8. Will not all these take up a proverb against him, a taunting riddle against him, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his? How long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges? Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken those who oppress you, and you will become their booty? Because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you because of men's blood and the violence of the land and city and all who dwell in it. Because of your actions, this is what's going to take place. When the wicked and those who abandon God, they start thinking about themselves, they start thinking about, okay, this is what I need, this is what's going to make me happy, this is going to fix my problem. I don't care what anybody else thinks, I'll take it from them. Because it's all about me now. That's the only thing it can be, isn't it? If it's not about God and we're not trusting in God, who else are we going to trust in? Ourselves. And he says that's what happens. But notice, God has always said, His principle is always, well, you can't take advantage of people. You can't start thinking about yourself and not wondering how it affects somebody else. Matter of fact, you remember back in Exodus? Notice this in Exodus 22, beginning at verse 25. He says, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like the money lenders to them. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. You know what he's saying here? Here's the contrast. When we start thinking only about ourselves and fixing our own problems, we don't worry about how it affects someone else. And back in Exodus, when he's making all the rules, you know what he says? If you lend somebody money, nothing wrong with lending them money, somebody may need some help, and they give you their cloak as a pledge, as collateral. Here's my cloak as collateral until I get this paid off. You know what he says to do? You take that cloak back to them at night because they need that because it's cold. Go back and get it in the morning. Take it back to them at night. See, he's thinking about both parties here, isn't he? He's thinking about the one that needed the money but pledged his coat, but they need it to keep warm, so you don't want to treat them harshly. but you also don't want to treat the one that's lending the money harshly. He said, here's what the fair thing to do is. That seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? But what God is saying, it matters how you treat somebody. It matters whether you take advantage of them or not. So when you put this back in contrast to what he's saying these people are acting like, when it comes to Habakkuk 2, is don't think that everything that we do, and that's what happens. We may not intend to, but little by little it becomes about me. It becomes about what I can get any way I can get. And it may not, and he's not just talking about go out and stealing it and taking it. It's about these things that we do that might take advantage of someone just to accomplish what we want to accomplish. He says that's not the way a person who lives by faith acts. You think about that other person. That's a New Testament concept too, isn't it? Prefer your brother above yourself. Think about how it affects somebody else. Just think, if we all claim to live by faith and we all thought about each other before we think about ourselves, would anything different even be in this congregation? Would it be any different? In our homes, would it be any different? At our workplace, would it be any different? I'd say it's pretty safe to say that it is. I'd say not every action that we do thinking about the other person. I don't know, maybe you do. I don't think everybody does. I don't think I do every time. It may be unintentionally or it may be without thought, but at some point, some deeper level, it's about me. Isn't it? That's what it becomes down to. It's about me. How can I accomplish this? Just as long as it is okay with me, I don't care if it's okay with somebody else. You know, I had a situation just arose, just here recently of something. And my thought process is, I don't care what they think. This works for me and my family. Does it matter if it works for somebody else's? And then, is that the attitude to have? It's not. You know, we got to think. We've got to work at this. That's why we should be sober, be vigilant. Because we always need to be clear thinking to make sure the decisions that we make are not to the disadvantage of individuals when it starts becoming about us. But if we trust in God, and this could happen when we're going through trials. A lot of times that's the most emotional time that we are, and that's really a time that we're talking about. So as we're going through this, sometimes it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to do whatever is necessary to get me out of this pain. I'm going to do whatever necessary to get me out of this particular trial. Because the quicker I can get out of it, the better I'm going to feel. And we may hurt somebody along the way doing it. But you know, a little pain may be what we need. A little trial may be what we need. Or us going through it may be what somebody else needs to watch us to go through that. We don't know. We don't know the whole picture, and that's the point. We don't know. We don't know why. We don't understand why. We don't understand why God's working this way. Or we don't understand why we don't even see Him working at times. And that's the struggle that Habakkuk is having here. He says, here's what could happen at that pivotal point. We start trusting in ourselves and don't trust in God, and then we start taking advantage. Then look at verses 9 through 11. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam with timbers will answer it. So we have this continuing picture. The Lord describes people who are taking advantage of others so they can have more for themselves to get through whatever it is that they're facing. And he says, here's what happened. All the money you get or all the things you get from this kind of method will be a testimony against you. He says, on Judgment Day, he said, it's going to be a shame to us on that day, as he says. He says, even our possessions that we have are a monument that cries out against us by how we obtain those things. Now, we're not talking to people in here, I don't think, to go out and take something illegally or ill-gotten gain of these types of things. But it's the mindset, though, of of trying to achieve things, even in our pain and suffering, even in our not understanding, that causes us to go down a path that could end up like he says, this nation that's going to come and rule over Judah here for a while. He said, don't become like that, because here's what starts happening when it does. And it's not something that just happens overnight. Little by little, pretty soon we're going to wake up one day and say, how did I get to the point that I'm at now? I've searched and searched and searched. I've grabbed and grabbed and grabbed, and now this is where I've ended up. And it's all about doing things without regard for life, without regard to that other person. Now notice, he says here, looking, where are we at? Where'd we get to, Titus? 12? Yeah, 12. He says, woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, is not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. God now, here he proclaims a woe of disaster that will come on those who do their work through injustice and bloodshed, and basically doing anything that they can and don't regard anybody else. He said, you just can't be like that. And he's proclaiming that people are more important than buildings and cities. So, say you got a person out there that wants to get things and get to the top no matter how they do it. Say they get everything. What do you really have? Look at even the Babylonians here. Look at the Roman Empire. Look at all the things that they did and tried to accomplish and did accomplish and gather through pillaging and raiding people and killing and all of this. And when it's all said and done, where did they end up? Just a place for people to fly over and look at their ruins. Oh, isn't this I bet that was a beautiful place at one time. It's nothing. And as it goes in and talks about God, he's saying you can do all this and try to do all this without God. Do you think at one moment, at one time, that God's going to look down and say, yeah, I better not do that. Boy, they're getting pretty big. Boy, I better second think. You think anything we can do that would make a difference to God? No matter how much we think we can accomplish, how much we think we could do, that we could overstep God? It's just not possible. And he says, don't become like this. You know, like we said in the beginning, what if God's answer for our nation is for another nation to come over and overtake us? And it could be because we think we're a nation that can do everything ourselves. We're a superpower and we don't need God. Sometimes there's times we can think that. And God can show us just how much that we do need Him. But it's all about taking advantage. Even look in verses 15 through 17. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed of uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and other shame will be on your glory. He says, here's what it ends up to, for the wicked. What they do is take advantage to every means necessary to take advantage of individuals. And we see this going on in our country today or all over. Individuals doing things to take advantage in a lot of different ways. And even in this way, he's talking about a certain kind of a sexual way of being able to take advantage. But that's what happens with the wicked. The wicked are getting to where it's I do whatever I want, whenever I want. We think when it comes to even idolatry, and that's really what he's talking about, as we're going to see, we're thinking, well, I'm not an idolater. But he's talking about individuals that worship themselves and worship things. He says, what happens? You're making these things become your God to where you become your own God. And you think about, all you're thinking about is getting power and glory and these type of things that belong to God. And he says, what happens? You start taking advantage on every area of people around you, and one day you'll pay. He said that because there's no end to it. That's what happens, isn't it? There's no end to it. There's no end to the satisfaction. What point does a person get to where they say, that's enough? I don't need any more. That's why at the very beginning he compared it to a drunkard and death. A drunkard, the reason they're a drunkard is they think this one more drink is just going to satisfy me. And it doesn't. And it ends up to ruins. It's just like death. Death is never satisfied. It's going to take and take and take and take and take. He said it's the same way. When we start trusting in ourselves, we trust in, I know what's going to make me happy. I know what's going to satisfy me. I know what's going to bring me peace. And it's this. It may be one thing for you, one thing for somebody else, another thing for me. But it never brings it. It never brings happiness. I've never met one drunkard, one drug addict, one whatever that said, this is what I always wanted to be. This is exactly where I wanted to end up in my life. Every single one was chasing something. And what they were chasing was satisfaction, peace, of if I could just get this will make... They're running from pain. I can fix my pain. I can fix my suffering. I can fix my trial in whatever way necessary. If I gain enough power, if I gain enough influence, if I do enough of this thing, then I can put away this. But all it is getting farther and farther away from God. See, this is why I think Habakkuk is having such a hard time understanding this, and I think it's why I have a hard time understanding it. But ultimately what God is saying to him is, one, you're not going to understand it. That's the whole point. It's almost the same thing he's telling Job. Whole point is you're not going to understand it. But how I'm explaining it to you is live by faith. Don't live for yourself. Don't think you're the smart one. Don't think you're the one that can figure it all out. Don't think that you're the God and that you can conquer everything, because it's all going to come to nothing. Trust in God. That's what it all comes down to. What profit is the image, he says in verse 18, that its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold should trust in it, to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with silver and gold, yet in it there is no breath at all. You know what it's saying? You can do all this you want to. There's nothing in it. There's nothing in it. You're trying to be the creator and create this image of what you think life should be, what you think the answer should be, what you should think the whole mold should be. And he said, there's no life in it. There's no breath in it. There's nothing to what you're trying to create here. You think about idols, and you think about these golden images and these wooden images that they make. He's saying that there's nothing to that, but there's nothing to any idol that we create for ourselves. And the number one idol we create for ourselves is ourselves. We worship that more than anything else. I still remember during Titus's gospel meeting, you did a whole lesson on this very thing, actually, of ourselves being an idol. And I've never forgot that. I've really thought about that a lot since then. And this is exactly what Habakkuk is talking about, or what God is talking about to him. We create this image in our mind of what we think something should be. And this will fix all of our problems. There's always a magic pill, isn't there? There's always a magic pill to lose weight. There's always a magic pill to feel better. There's always a magic pill. That's what we're searching for. We're searching for this one thing that we think that's going to fix our whole life. This one thing to take away all of my problems. If I just had this. Well, what would it take to do that? You talk about, you hear people say, well, if I was rich, that would solve everything. How much is rich? What would it take? How many barns you have to build? Like the rich young farmer there. I've got all of this stuff. What am I going to do with it? I'll build more barns. How many barns does it take? And then if you lose your life, whose barns is it? Whose stuff is it? That's the whole thing Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, wasn't it? You do all of this. It's all vanity. It's all to nothing. Who's it going to be when you're gone anyway? I mean, what are we really striving for? What's really important to us? What are we really trying to be? It comes back to either, as he says in verse, in verse 4 there, we either live for ourselves or we're living by faith. it's only two choices. So we're going to accept God's answer even though we don't understand it and trust in Him if we live by faith. But if we don't understand it and we don't trust Him, we're not going to accept it and we're going to try to do our own thing. And our own thing doesn't end very well. But after saying all that, notice what he says in verse 20. But the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before Him. You know what he's saying? All of this is going on. Everything's happening. But guess what? God is still where He's supposed to be. And God still sees what He's supposed to see. And there's nothing else to be said on the matter. Keep silent. Nothing else to be said about it. We either believe that or we don't. We either accept that or we don't. No matter what we're going through, even if we think we don't see it and can't see it, as Job said, we can't even perceive it. Even when we're to that point, do we still know He's where He's supposed to be? Do we still know He's seeing what He's supposed to be seeing? And if we know that, what else is it that we're to know? What else should we know? What other answer does He need to give us? We still cry out to Him with our needs. That's what He wants us to do. We still tell Him our troubles. We still tell Him our problems. We still tell Him even what we want. Because that's what we're supposed to do. But when it's all said and done, His will be done, right? We either believe that or we don't. And all of this that he's talking about Habakkuk, you don't understand what I'm telling you about this nation rising up. You don't understand what the benefit's going to be. You don't understand the reason behind it. That's okay. I told you you wouldn't, so it's okay that you don't. But it's not okay that you lose faith in me in the process. It's not okay that you take me off the throne in the process. It's not okay that you bring glory to yourself and try to fix your own thing in the process. Don't abandon your faith just because you don't understand. Don't turn into one of the wicked. Because you start down that path, there's no end to that path. Except for destruction. You start down the path of it becomes about me, then it doesn't become about anybody else. And then here's what happened. You start taking advantage on a lot of different levels. Some people reach different levels than others, but it's still taking advantage. So which path are we going to choose? I don't want to be like this, do you? I don't want to be like this nation that he says is going to overtake them. I don't want to be like them. But what part of them is in me? It all depends on what we choose. The path we choose that we want to go down, isn't it? So when we start thinking about, his final answer here, it kind of makes me think about, well, where does that leave us? Well, look in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Notice how Paul put this. He says, "Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Do not become idolaters as were some of them." He's talking about their fathers that were in the wilderness. He said, "As is it written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ if some of them also tempted and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them as an example, and that they were written for our admonition, upon whom the end of the ages have come." He says, don't be like these type of people, and part of this is complaining. Now, there's a point that we go to God with our troubles, we go to God with our desires, we go to God with our wants, but we got to be careful when we go with our complaints. He says, notice what he says here, "Nor complaining as some of them also complained and were destroyed because of it." I may not understand what God's doing. I may not like what He's doing because I don't understand it. But how much right do I have to continue to complain about it? Do I have any right to do that? You remember what Job said? Which part of Job? Didn't I do Job? Job 40 says, "Then Job answered the Lord and said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I laid my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no farther." Remember that whole time, Job, if If I could just get audience with God, this is what I'd tell him. If I could get audience with God, this is what I'd tell him. You know what Job ended up saying? I'm going to cover my mouth and I'm not going to speak no more. I've took it too far. And I'm sorry, and he repented of it. Why? Because he didn't understand. And because he didn't understand, he thought it was a certain way. And because he thought it was a certain way, he thought it was against God. God is doing this. But God wasn't doing that. And that's what we can think sometimes. So we've got to be careful with our complaints. We've got to be careful with our thought process of when we don't understand. So when we think about abandoning our faith and we think about going through, it's fine to question what we believe. I think we should question it. I think it's a requirement to question it. I can't understand it and I can't follow it if I'm not questioning it and studying it. But there's going to be parts of our faith we don't understand. There's going to be things that we see that we don't always understand why they are. At that point, what are we going to do? At that point, who are we going to be? A person that lives for herself or a person that lives by faith? Any final thoughts or any thoughts about this?
Kind of interesting. You were talking about that difference between going to God with our sadness or hopelessness and giving that versus complaining. And I was just then trying to jive that. Like Jesus talks about the persistent widow or the persistent person that knocks on the door and the judge will eventually answer. So you want to be persistent. I was thinking about faults that I asked 3 times for this morning to be removed, and then I got told you're good.
Right.
So I didn't pray. I needed to pray for me. And it kind of brought to my mind that difference between, I think there is a hopelessness sometimes there is where we really are in dire straits, and I think we do continually bring that before God. But the thing about the complaining with the Israelites, that's kind of like their bellies were full, their shoes weren't wearing out, they were fine. The complaining was not because they were in great need, it was because they were driven by their lusts,
Right.
basically. And as you were talking about the nation from Habakkuk, one thing that kept coming to my mind is that God's people had become that nation. The nation that was coming to get them, they were awful. God people.
Well, that was the wickedness Habakkuk was talking about to start with.
Yeah, exactly. That's when he was talking about the idol. That's what I was thinking about. Of just like this nation's come as a pagan nation, and they don't realize that God's the one that's given them their power. But the same thing could be said about Israel and Judah. They had turned to idolatry, and I think that's always the thing that's important for us to look at. Same thing with Israel back in the wilderness. They brought Egypt with them. A lot of the problems that the Egyptians had and the Pharaoh had, they carried right along with them. Well, who's God that I should listen to him? Who's Moses that I should listen to him? And the thing that always gets me about the complaining too is, I think the easiest way we could do that is probably with elderships in the church. That's probably, we won't often complain to God in our prayer, but the way we treat elderships a lot of times probably is pretty similar to the way that Moses got the treatment in the wilderness.
Yeah. And I think we complain because we don't understand decisions. We don't understand, and then it becomes self-serving because, okay, I didn't like that decision because that's not what I would have done. See, that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about when we start serving ourselves and not thinking about others. And that's when you start complaining. You're complaining to God because they're lusting after things and for themselves. We complain, as Titus said, about the eldership because why? The main complaints would be they're not doing it my way. Well, does God have to do everything my way? Is my way the best way? I think it is. Just like my opinion. My opinion is better than anybody's opinion in here because it's my opinion, right? And everybody here thinks the same thing. But that don't make it the best thing for everybody. We can have, that's why I heard somebody say one time about the church, it's where everybody has their say, but not everybody has their way. And that's pretty much how it is. We all have our say, but we all don't have our way. And sometimes that can upset us and cause us to be more self-serving. And we've got to really pay attention to that. That's why I said if everybody looked at it as what is best for the whole. Think of the peace and harmony that would be around that's not around now. I think it would go a long way.